very distinguished leaders in Africa, pride of African women, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, and Her Excellency Ambassador Salma Malika Haddadi, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, and we're also joined by distinguished Minister Fabrice David, Minister of Agro-Industry, Food Security, Blue Economy and Fisheries of Mauritius. And online, we were supposed to be joined by our dear sister, USG, Cristina Duarte, and the Secretary General and Special Advisor on Africa. Unfortunately, the connection is not established yet. However, we hope that she can join us at some moment if this happens. But of course, we're joined also by distinguished ministers from sisterly countries. So, Excellencies, distinguished ministers, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure on behalf of the African Union Permanent Observer Mission to the United Nations to warmly welcome you to Africa Day at the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development and to the official launch of the Africa Sustainable Development Report 2026. I'm particularly honored by the presence of such a distinguished gathering of leaders and partners. Your participation reflects our shared commitment to advancing the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063 through stronger partnerships, coordinated action, and African-led solutions. Today's meeting comes at an important moment as we approach the final stretch toward 2030. Africa remains determined to accelerate progress despite the multiple challenges confronting the continent. The launch of the Africa Sustainable Development Report 2026 provides a timely opportunity to assess where we stand, identify practical solutions, and strengthen collective action to deliver tangible results for the people of Africa. The ministerial dialogue that will follow brings together an exceptional panel of ministers, senior government officials, representatives of youth and women, development partners, and international organizations. I encourage all participants to engage in an open, forward-looking, and action-oriented discussion, sharing experiences and innovative approaches that can help accelerate sustainable development across our continent. I wish to express our sincere appreciation to the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, the African Union Commission, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and we are joined here by His Excellency Deputy, the Under-Secretary General, Secretary of UNICA, and the United Nations as well, Development Program, and all partners whose collaboration has made today's event possible. I thank you all for your presence and wish you a productive and successful week. According to the program, we are supposed to start by opening remarks with our dear sister, Under Secretary General Cristina Duarte. She, unfortunately, cannot join us in person. She was supposed to join us virtually, but in absence of this, her statement is going to be read by our dear brother, Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, Director, Policy, Monitoring and Advocacy in OSAA. So the floor is yours, my dear brother.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Ambassador Idris, Your Excellency the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Your Excellency the Deputy Secretary General, Chair, Your Excellency the Chair of the 12th session of the African Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, Your Excellencies, Ministers and Heads of Delegation, and dear colleagues, partners, friends. I am reading this statement on behalf of the Secretary General Cristina Duarte. The United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa is pleased to co-organize this year's Africa Day event with the African Union Commission, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the United Nations Development Programme, and the African Development Bank. I would like to also extend our sincere thanks to the African Union Permanent Observer Mission to the United Nations for hosting us at today's event. This year's Voluntary National Reviews remind us where the 2030 Agenda stands, with less than 5 years of implementation remaining. Many African states have reported real progress, yet progress against SDGs has also stalled or in some cases reversed. And countries have reported the same constraint year after year. The gap between the resources a country holds and the fiscal space those resources actually deliver. Today I would like to speak to that constraint directly and offer a perspective on addressing it. The theme of this ministerial meeting is advancing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063 through transformative and coordinated actions. As I will soon conclude my term as Special Advisor on 31st July, I will frame my remarks around 4 years of research undertaken by the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, and what we believe offers a genuinely transformative action available to African states now, the adoption of a strategic asset management approach. In 2023, UN OSAA's flagship report named a paradox that many in this room will recognize. Africa is rich in financial, energy, and agricultural resources, yet the continent continues to face debt distress, energy poverty, and food insecurity. We called this the triple paradox, and we showed how each element feeds the others. A year later, in 2024, we traced that paradox to where it was landing hardest in terms of debt. External debt across the continent had climbed past $650 billion US, and in 2024 alone, debt servicing cost African states close to $90 billion US. More than 40% of African countries were spending more on servicing debt than on healthcare. Even then, our report was clear that debt was a symptom rather than the underlying structural fault. The deeper constraint was an international financial architecture that African states did not design and cannot fully control. In 2025, we named that deeper constraint directly. African states do not lack resources. They struggle to fully control the flows that these resources generate. Regaining that control means strengthening country systems and public institutions, improving domestic resource mobilization, and building coherence between national, regional, and continental frameworks, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area and the reformed global financial architecture. This year, we hope to offer a blueprint to make that argument operational. If the task before African states is to control financial and economic flows, we need to assess how best to achieve this asset by asset. In our forthcoming 2026 report, we call the underlying gap between Africa's resource wealth and flow control challenge the sovereignty deficit. It is the distance between the formal legal ownership of strategic asset classes by African states and the institutional capacity to govern the economic and financial flows generated by those assets. In particular, this spans financial, natural, institutional, human capital, and technological assets. Through our research, we estimate that approximately $2.1 trillion US a year moves through uncontrolled flows and missed opportunities across the continent. Of this, 178 billion is in financial assets, 200 billion in natural and physical assets, 2 billion in institutional and human capital assets, and 1.2 billion in technological, data, and outer space assets. I want to be candid about what this figure represents, as it does not represent a shortfall of African ambition or effort. Formal legal ownership of an asset alone, without the institutional capacity to govern and capture its value for society, creates a gap in what is mobilized for development. Closing that gap is within reach, and it is the purpose of strategic asset management. Along those lines, strategic asset management contains 5 parts or capabilities. First is evaluating its strategic assets to determine their worth. Second, governing them through clear rules and accountable institutions. Third, capturing the value they generate. Fourth, reinvesting that captured value into productive transformation. Fifth, protecting each asset from capture, depletion, and alienation. Exercised as a public trust, this cycle allows a state to move from managing perceived development scarcity to managing the abundance it already possesses. We tested this approach in a concrete setting during this year's Africa Dialogue series, co-organized in May by OSAA, the African Union Permanent Observer Mission to the United Nations, and various partners from across the UN and beyond. The focus was water and sanitation, a sector where the gap between physical asset and governed value is easy to see and measure. Applied to water, valuation means knowing the real worth of treatment plants, storage infrastructure, and distribution networks, not merely their construction cost. Governance means clear institutional responsibility across the full life cycle of every asset. Capture means collecting the tariff and value that a well-run utility can generate. Reinvestment means channeling that value back into that asset. Protection means treating water infrastructure as a national balance sheet item rather than a project output, so that a change in government or a shock to the budget cannot erode it. Water is one asset among many, and I want to be clear that the same five-part approach applies across sectors. We recognize the scale of what we are proposing. Institutionalizing strategic asset management requires foresight capacity within government structures that many states are still building. It requires financial governance reform, more efficient public expenditure, better tax systems, stronger domestic financial asset mobilization, and sustained work against illicit financial flows. None of this happens by ministerial declaration alone, and we do not pretend otherwise. In closing, allow me to reflect once more on the theme of this meeting. To be transformative, we need African states to move from managing scarcity to managing abundance, valuing, governing, capturing, reinvesting in, and protecting the assets they already hold, rather than searching for resources they do not have. To be coordinated, we need discipline applied at every level within national institutions, across regional frameworks, and within a reformed international financial architecture that works with African states rather than around them. This is what the Strategic Asset Management Framework offers us. A transformation in posture and coordination across levels in service of the sovereignty and prosperity that Africa's people deserve. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear brother Jean-Paul Adam, for sharing with us the statement of Her Excellency USG Christina Duarte, who would like to express our deep thanks and appreciation to her for her commitment, for her cooperation with the African Commission, and for her fruitful work for the interest of Africa since she assumed her office. Let me now turn to our distinguished DSG for her keynote address, Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Chairperson. So the floor is yours, our guest.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, my sister Salva Malika Hadidi, the
So
Deputy
this is the Deputy Secretary General.
It's okay. Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, and we are so proud of her. She's our leader on the continent, especially when it comes to women's leadership. His Excellency Fabrice David, the Junior Minister of Agri, Industry, Food Security, Blue Economy and Fisheries of Mauritius. Of course, ably represented by Jean-Paul Adam, thank you for reading the speech. My sister Christina Duarte, and I really want to appreciate her leadership, her commitment to Africa every day of her mandate over the last few years. His Excellency, of course, my brother Mohammed Idris, the permanent observer of the African Union to the UN, ministers and heads of delegation, and let me underscore the women leaders that I have the pleasure of meeting who are here in this room today. Excellencies, sisters and brothers, distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to be back in this room. It's my home, and I thank the African Union Observer Mission, Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, ECA, UNDP, and the African Development Bank for convening us once again. Africa Day is where the high-level political forum hears the continent speak for itself. This year, that voice is stronger than ever. 19 African countries are presenting VNRs from every sub-region, at every stage of development, each one opening its books to the world. I want to congratulate all 19 for their submissions. A voluntary national review is an act of leadership, and I want to commend Egypt presenting their 4th VNR and Togo their 5th. Excellencies, this morning we also launched the 2026 Africa Sustainable Development Report, produced jointly by the African Union, the African Development Bank, UNDP, and ECA, and I want to recognize Clara Batite, I think I see you in the room this morning, who has been active throughout the week. This is the 9th in the series and focused on the 5 goals under review of this year's forum: water and sanitation, energy, industry and infrastructure, cities, and partnerships. I've looked at the reviews and the Union's own assessment under Agenda 2063. And this report, side by side, 3 messages come through all of them. And I'd like to share them to frame our discussion today. The first message: access is spreading, but quality is the promise we have yet to keep. The gains Africa has made are significant, and we should say so and celebrate them. Progress is recorded in 12 of the 17 goals. Basic drinking water now reaches 81% of our populations, up from 56% in 2013. Electricity access has risen from 46 to 53% since 2015. Mobile networks now cover almost 93% of our population, and connectivity is opening doors for digital services across the continent. For our young people, that connectivity can be a bridge to education, to enterprise and decent work, but only if it is affordable, reliable, and matched by the investment skills that are needed. However, quantity and quality do not equate, and if we hold ourselves to that standard, as we should, a different story emerges. For water that is safe to drink, coverage reaches 36% of the continent, against a global average of 70%. Only 3 in 10 Africans have safely managed sanitation, and 650 million of us lack even the basic facilities. Some 970 million Africans still cook with polluting fuels, and the smoke takes around 400,000 lives every year, most of them women and children. The disparities compound the challenge. More than 8 in 10 urban Africans have electricity. In rural areas, 4 in 10. Nearly half of our urban population lives in informal settlements, twice the global average. Continental averages can hide all of this, and gains in one subregion can mask a reversal in another. So the VNRs convey real progress, and the report confirms it. But access to services is not enough until we see the quality of services for everyone. The second message: the gap we need to fill is in implementation, specifically financing and the capable institutions with the skills that are needed to deliver. This report says it clearly: Africa's challenge is not a lack of frameworks. The 2030 Agenda and Agenda 2063 give us the vision, and they reinforce each other. In fact, the Agenda 2063 is far more ambitious than we see in the second 10-year plan, the roadmap towards that, aligned with the 2030 Agenda. What does stand between the plans and the people is fragmented implementation, limited financing, and constrained institutional capacities. Consider what the report tells us about money. Government revenue averages 23% of GDP, against a global average of 32%. Tax revenue stands at about 16%. More than 20 countries are at high risk of debt distress or already in it, and borrowing costs remain out of line with the fundamentals. Official development assistance to Africa continues to fall. Annual investment in energy access runs at around $4 billion, far below the target. And all of this against a backdrop of a global environment delivering shock after shock. The instability in the Middle East has amplified food, energy, and fertilizer price volatility, with direct spillovers into African economies. The response has 2 parts, and both are within reach. The report tells us what we need to do, both at home and abroad. At home, the report points to what works: broaden the tax base, digitalize revenue collection, curb illicit flows. In Zambia, the government's bus service, for example, more than doubled non-tax revenue in 2 years, from $500 million to over $1.2 billion. Remittances at more than $104 billion have proven the most stable external flow we have. Reducing the transaction costs is money on the table. Abroad, the international financial architecture must change. Sevilla gave us the reform agenda, and member states have launched the Borrowers Platform, a way to negotiate from shared strength rather than alone. But also let us congratulate the African Development Bank that has put on the table the African finance architecture that must be addressed. Financial institutions working hard together to access the $1 trillion to $4 trillion that exist of African money outside the continent. So this is all there to be used, and let us use it. And on this, there needs to be expanded concessional finance, debt relief that restores fiscal space, and member states meeting their promise on climate finance. The report calls these prerequisites, not extras. The third message, Africa's accelerators are African. The report names regional cooperation as a powerful accelerator, and it is. A continent trading with itself through the African Continental Free Trade Area, pooling energies across borders, building shared infrastructure and regional value chains is a more competitive and more resilient continent. But integration must translate into real opportunities for women traders, entrepreneurs to access larger markets, and for young people to move from education and training to decent jobs and livelihoods. The African Union's membership of the G20 gives Africa new leverage in rooms where the rules of debt, climate finance, and trade are written. And the report is clear that turning that seat into results depends on coordinated African priorities consistently advanced. This morning, I attended the roundtable on the inequalities panel, the International Panel for Inequalities, that was led by South Africa at the G20, together with Brazil and with Spain. This is huge opportunities for us to address the inequalities on the continent and globally. 41 African countries now have statistical legislation meeting international standards, and 39 are implementing national statistical plans. The 19 reviews before this forum are supported by these systems. If we cannot measure the investment outcomes that we get, then there is a lot of missing people in the results. This was made clear in Addis, and I'm glad that we will hear from my sister, the Deputy Chairperson, this morning. Excellencies, together, these three messages point one way. Africa does have a vision that is still representative of the people's aspirations. Africa is building the tools. But this cannot be done without peace. At the center is silencing the guns. We welcome the efforts and the opportunity the latest opportunity that we've had for peace on the continent, led by Algeria and Mali. Without peace, we cannot get sustainable development. It will be difficult to achieve, but we need the foundations of lasting democracies, of governance, to ensure that peace holds when we find it. The UN is ready to support and accompany you, our resident coordinators and country teams, with the technical expertise behind national priorities. And while we deliver the promise of 2030, as the President of the General Assembly said yesterday, using football as an analogy, much can be done at the last minute of a game. Many goals can be scored. We are thinking beyond 2030 at the same time, and Africa should not be a chapter in somebody else's draft. Africa must hold the pen and inform the global narrative. And that means ensuring that we have women and young people at the table where these priorities are set. My hope for today is that we leave with decisions on financing, on genuine partnerships, and on delivery of the promises that we have made to the continent, a future for all Africans.
Thank you very much, Excellency Amina Mohammed, UN Deputy Secretary General. It's always a pleasure and honor having you at your Africa House and listening to your insightful views, and we share your hope. I would like to welcome also the ministers who joined us recently in the Africa House. Most welcome to all ministers. Honorable ministers, we're honored to have you. And now I'm going to have another important keynote address by Her Excellency Ambassador Salma Malika Haddadi, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission.
Excellency, Robert, Mr. Claro Gatete, USG and Executive Secretary of UNECA, Excellency Ambassador Idris, our host and AU Permanent Observer to the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to address this 2026 Africa Day at the HLPF, also marking both the launch of the 2026 Africa Sustainable Development Report, but also the first biennial continental progress report on the second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063. Allow me to extend the African Union Commission's sincere appreciation to our long-standing partners, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the United Nations Development Programme, the African Development Bank, the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, and the African Institute for Economic Development and Trade for the excellent collaboration that has made today's event possible. This annual gathering has become Africa's unique platform for a common continental voice on sustainable development, sharing the experiences from our member states, and strengthening our engagement and partnership with Africa's development partners on both Agenda 2063 and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Excellencies, this year's theme, which is advancing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Agenda 2063 through transformative and coordinated actions, could not be more timely. Indeed, only 4 years remain before the target year for sustainable development, while Africa enters the second decade for acceleration towards implementing the second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063. The world around us continues to evolve rapidly. Global economic uncertainty, climate change, geopolitical tensions, debt burdens, and constrained fiscal space continue to test African economies. Yet, Africa remains a continent of resilience and opportunity, and I would like to emphasize that. Africa remains a continent of resilience and opportunity, and I think that was really ably highlighted by Mr. Jean-Paul Adam in his statement of Adam Duarte. Africa is among the fastest growing regions globally, with a youthful population and expanding digital economies. Our challenge, therefore, is how quickly we can transform commitments into outcomes our citizens can feel every day. This is precisely why the 2026 African Sustainable Development Report and the first biennial continental progress report on the second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063 matter. These are evidence-based policy instruments that enable African leaders and development partners to understand where Africa stands and to determine collectively the actions required to place our continent firmly on the pathway of both sustainable development goals and Agenda 2063. Both agendas are not two separate journeys. They are complementary roadmaps guiding Africa towards inclusive growth, structural transformation, and shared prosperity. The African Union Commission is particularly proud to have jointly prepared the 2026 Africa Sustainable Development Report together with the African Development Bank, the United Nations Development Programme, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. A partnership that reflects our shared conviction that Africa's development aspirations can only be realized through coordinated action and integrated planning. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 2026 Africa Sustainable Development Report represents a balanced picture. Africa continues to make progress, but not yet fast enough to meet our 2030 and 2063 ambitions. For instance, we are gaining ground in expanding access to clean water, renewable energy, digital connectivity, and regional cooperation. Yet, access to safely managed water and sanitation still lacks. Energy access, particularly in rural areas, financing gaps remain among the greatest obstacles to implementation. These findings are reinforced by the first Regional Continental Progress Report on the second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063, which records an overall continental performance of 53% across all 7 aspirations. Strong progress has been made in aligning national plans with Agenda 2063 and advancing digital transformation. But structural transformation, productive employment, infrastructure connectivity, and sustainable financing continues to demand greater attention. The gap between policy commitment and actual delivery remains one of our greatest challenges. Both reports therefore point to the same response: strengthen domestic resource mobilization, expand climate and development finance, accelerate digital transformation, invest in sustainable infrastructure, and deepen partnerships at every level, while strengthening national delivery systems and data capacity, and protecting development gains from conflicts and climate change. And I think that my sister DSG has really so clearly highlighted the intrinsic link between development, peace, and stability. Excellencies, the key message emerging from both reports is clear. What is now required is faster implementation, stronger partnerships, increased investment, and collective, and the time for incremental progress has passed. This is the decade for acceleration delivery. For the African Union Commission, this means working even more closely with our member states to strengthen national planning and data systems, and to ensure that Agenda 2063 is fully integrated into national budgets and investment frameworks. At the continental level, we must accelerate flagship initiatives central to Africa's transformation, including the African Continental Free Trade Area, the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, the Single African Air Transport Market, our high-speed rails network, and the digital transformation strategy. But also the African Medicines Agency. These are not simply projects. They are catalysts for transformation, integration, and shared prosperity of our country. Their implementation certainly also requires that we work more on our partnerships, resource mobilization strategies, debt sustainability, and innovative financing mechanisms and models, amongst many others. Excellencies, Africa's greatest asset is not found beneath its soil. It is found in the ingenuity, resilience, and aspirations of its people, particularly its women and youth. Our responsibility is to create an enabling environment that allows them to thrive through quality education, decent jobs, digital opportunities, and inclusive governance. And I think that we all have in mind those young sons and daughters that are innovating to adapt to their environment, and they are creating solutions. So the asset is in our youth and our children. As we launch the 2026 Africa Sustainable Development Report, let us recommit ourselves to turning evidence into action, commitments into implementation, and partnerships into measurable results. Together, we can build an Africa where every child has access to clean water and quality education, where our cities are inclusive, resilient, and sustainable, and where peace, security, and partnerships unlock the full potential of our continent. This is the Africa envisioned in Agenda 2063, and this is the legacy we must deliver for present and future generations. Thank you for
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Salma Haddadi, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, for your illuminating speech and for your leadership.
I sit here.
Now we go to a minister with multi-headed ministerial capacity, His Excellency Mr. Fabrice David, Minister of Agro-Industry, Food Security, Blue Economy, and Fisheries of Mauritius. Maybe other ministerial portfolios will come after that. Of course, he is with us in his capacity as well as the chair of the 12th session of the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. So the floor is yours, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Chair, for reminding me the challenging responsibilities on my shoulders. Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Her Excellency Ambassador Selma Malika Haddadi, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Mohammed Idris, Permanent Observer of the African Union to the United Nations, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, brothers and sisters, it is a great honor for me to address you today in my capacity as chair of the 12th session of the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development. Yesterday, during the regional perspectives on SDG implementation, I had the privilege of being the voice of Africa alongside the chairs of the 4 other regional forums on sustainable development. And today is my honor to take the floor once again, this time during our special event, the Africa Day at the High Level Political Forum. Today is our day. It is the day where African voices come together not only to assess progress, but to shape the future. And it is also a privilege to launch the Africa Sustainable Development Report 2026, whose evidence and recommendations will guide our collective efforts as we enter the decisive final stretch towards 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa occupies a unique place in the global sustainable development architecture. We are the only region in the world implementing 2 complementary sustainable development agendas simultaneously. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is our shared global framework with its 17 SDGs, now entering its final 4 years, and the African Union Agenda 2063, our own 50-year continental vision built around 7 aspirations and successive 10-year implementation plans. And these 2 agendas are not competing visions. They are mutually reinforcing. They are not in opposition. They are in coordination. One provides a global direction, the other reflects Africa's own aspirations. And together, they define the future we want to build. And Africa is a continent of extraordinary diversity. We are 54 countries, more than 1.5 billion people, representing nearly 19% of the world's population. We are North, South, East, West, and Central Africa. We are landlocked countries, coastal states, and island states. And my own country, Mauritius, is proud to be an African small island developing state. We represent different levels of income, different cultures, and different realities. Yet, despite this diversity, one truth unites us. Africa is one continent, one people, one future. And we want that future to be resilient, inclusive, and sustainable. Yes, we want a sustainable Africa driven by our 2 complementary agendas. Excellencies, the 12th session of the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, held in Addis Ababa in April this year, was convened under the theme Turning the Tide, Transformative and Coordinated Actions for the 2030 Agenda and Agenda 2063. And allow me to express my sincere appreciation to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the African Union Commission, the African Development Bank, the United Nations system, and all our partners whose leadership, dedication, and commitment made the forum a resounding success. And the message emerging from Addis Ababa was clear. Business as usual is no longer an option. The time has come to move decisively from commitments to implementation, from declarations to delivery, from fragmented interventions to transformative and coordinated action. And the first biennial Continental Progress Report on the second 10-year implementation plan of Agenda 2063 records an overall continental performance score of 53% over the years 2024 and 2025. And this tells us two important stories. The first is encouraging. African countries have made remarkable progress in aligning national development plans and institutional frameworks with both agendas. Digital transformation is advancing. Institutions are becoming stronger. Human development continues to improve. Political commitment has never been stronger. But the second story reminds us that planning alone is not enough. A significant implementation gap remains between planning, budgeting, and delivery. And on the 2030 agenda, the picture is equally clear. Africa needs to accelerate progress on 12 of the 17 SDGs and reverse negative trends on the remaining 5 if we want to achieve the targets. Despite determined efforts by African countries and our development partners, progress towards the SDGs remains challenging. This reality demands greater urgency, stronger partnerships, and financing that matches the scale of our ambitions. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa's commitment to accountability is stronger than ever. To date, all 54 African countries have presented at least one voluntary national review. This demonstrates that Africa does not fear assessment. Africa embraces accountability and truly believes that what cannot be measured cannot be improved. And if you allow me, Chair, to use a football analogy, this year, 10 African nations proudly represented our continent at the FIFA World Cup. And I can see the minister from Cabo Verde. Cabo Verde remained unbeaten in their group, including against Spain, who will play the final on Sunday. Bravo, Cabo Verde. And we are proud. We are proud of Cabo Verde and the 9 other African teams who played that World Cup. And not far from those football pitches, here in New York, another African team is taking the field. At this high-level political forum, out of the 36 countries presenting VNRs, 19 are African countries. 2 African countries are presenting their 4th VNR, 11 are presenting their 3rd, 6 are presenting their 2nd. This is the Africa we want. An Africa which is future-oriented, an Africa which is VNR-driven, an Africa that uses evidence to assess progress, strengthen accountability, and accelerate implementation. Excellencies, the discussions in Addis Ababa identified 5 strategic priorities to turn the tide, and I will be quite quick on those priorities. First, accelerating implementation through transformative action. The solutions are known. The challenge is scaling up and delivering them faster. Second, scaling up financing for sustainable development. Domestic resource mobilization, innovative financing, debt sustainability, and improved access to affordable development finance must therefore become central pillars of implementation. Third, investing in the enablers of structural transformation. This year high-level political forum reviews SDGs 6, 7, 9, 11, and 17. Water, energy, infrastructure, innovation, sustainable cities, and partnerships. And these are not standalone goals. Together, they are the foundations upon which resilient economies, decent jobs, food security, industrialization, climate resilience, and human well-being depend. Africa's transformation requires intensified investment in these interconnected priorities. Fourth, harnessing science, technology, innovation, and data. Digital transformation is no longer a choice. It is a powerful accelerator of sustainable development. It improves governance, strengthens accountability, expands opportunities, and empowers our youth and our women. Fifth and final, strengthening partnerships as the catalyst for success. SDG 17 is not simply another goal. It is the accelerator that connects all the other SDGs. No government can deliver sustainable development alone. No international organization can do it alone. No financial institution, no private sector, no civil society organization. Success depends on stronger partnerships at every level. Ladies and gentlemen, today as we launch the Africa Sustainable Development Report 2026, let us not see it simply as another report. Let us see it as a roadmap, as a source of evidence, as a guide for better practices, and above all, a call to accelerate implementation. Excellencies, brothers and sisters, Africa has the youngest population in the world. Africa possesses immense natural resources. Africa is rich in innovation, entrepreneurship, and human talent. Africa has the vision. Africa has the roadmap. What we need now is accelerated implementation, stronger partnerships, and financing that matches our ambition. In closing, as chair of the 12th session of the Africa Regional Forum of Sustainable Development, I call upon all stakeholders, African governments, the United Nations system, international financial institutions, development partners, the private sector, and the civil society to renew their commitments and intensify cooperation during this decisive final stretch to 2030. If we act with urgency, with solidarity, and determination, Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063 will not remain aspirations on paper. They will become a reality for the 1.5 billion Africans we serve, and a powerful contribution to a more prosperous, resilient, and sustainable world. Allow me to conclude with these words that I have shared before about being African. I said it earlier this year in Kampala. I said it once again in Addis Ababa. And today in New York, I say it once again. I am not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. I thank you all for having me.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister Fabrice David, for your insightful, uplifting speech. And thank you for ably chairing the 12th session of the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, in addition to your multi-ministerial capacities. And indeed, if Africa can do great in soccer, definitely can do great in sustainable development. Now we want to, before we proceed to the ministerial dialogue, we will have the official launch of the Africa Sustainable Development Report 2026 by remarks from UNICA, followed by remarks from UNDP, and we're started by remarks by His Excellency Under Secretary General, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention for Africa, His Excellency Mr. Lavir Gateti. The floor is yours, my brother.
Thank you very much, my brother. DSG, DCG, Your Excellency, Minister for very wonderful speech, and our leader for the Africa Regional Forum for Sustainable Development. Yesterday you did a great job, and I think today you exceeded what you said yesterday. Thank you very much, very much for that. Excellencies, dear colleagues, permit me to sign an established protocol. It is a privilege for me to join you today for the Africa Day at the High Level Political Forum and for the launch of the 2026 Africa Sustainable Development Report, a report that comes at a defining moment for Africa and the world. The global context in which we meet is both sobering and demanding. Less than 5 years remain to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, yet the world is confronting a convergence of crises, geopolitical tension, rising debt burdens, climate shocks, slowing growth, declining development assistance, and widening financing gaps. The global SDG financing gap has now reached approximately $4 trillion annually for developing countries. The instability in the Middle East has further intensified uncertainty, disrupting trade routes, increasing energy and food price volatility, and placing additional pressure on developing economies, including those in Africa. Recent UN assessments warn that these disruptions are amplifying inflationary pressures and raising growing costs precisely when many countries can least afford them. And yet, despite these formidable headwinds, Africa is not retreating. It is adapting, innovating, and moving forward, as mentioned before. A few months ago, leaders gathered in Addis Ababa under the theme, as mentioned by the minister, turning the tide, transformative and coordinated actions for the 23rd Agenda and Agenda 2063. The message was unequivocal. Africa is determined not merely to manage a crisis, but to drive transformation. It is in this global and continental context that the 2026 Africa Sustainable Development Report provides both a timely assessment of where Africa stands and a clear direction for the journey ahead. Indeed, the 2026 Africa Sustainable Development Report confirms that Africa has made significant strides. We see that progress echoed in the 19 African countries presenting voluntary national reviews at this high-level political forum. Their experiences inform us that even in the midst of multiple global shocks, Africa continues to advance. They also reinforce a clear message: the time for delivery is now. And indeed, across the continent, tangible gains are visible in infrastructure development, digital innovation, renewable energy expansion, regional integration, and access to services. But the report also delivers a candid message. Progress is not fast enough. Financing constraints, infrastructure deficits, climate impacts, conflicts, and debt service pressures continue to slow implementation. The gap must now close. The gap we must now close is not an ambition gap, but an execution gap, as mentioned by previous speakers. Because what good are commitments if they do not change lives? What value is a target if it does not, for example, create jobs for our young people, or connect farmers to markets, or provide clean water and electricity for families? The imperative, therefore, is to transform our plans into policies and actions, and that will lead to tangible results for our people. Fortunately, Africa enters this next phase with one extraordinary advantage. Today, Africa is home to more than 1.5 billion people, as mentioned, and by 2050, our population is expected to reach 2.5 billion, and more than 1/4 of humanity will be African. This is one of the greatest opportunities for the 21st century, but the demographics alone will not create the prosperity Africa seeks. The question is, will we transform this demographic growth into the economic dividend, or will we allow opportunity to become vulnerability? The answer depends on the the actions we take today. First, we must strengthen implementation capacity. Strong institutions, reliable data systems, and accountable governance remain essential to delivering results at scale. Second, we must mobilize the resources needed to close the financing gap. The severe commitments provide renewed momentum for this sustainability, domestic resource mobilization, and reform of the international financial activity. Africa must continue to advocate for a system that lowers the cost of capital and recognizes our development reality. Third, we must accelerate regional integration through the African Continental Free Trade Area. A fragmented Africa cannot industrialize at the pace required. A connected Africa can become a global growth force. Fourth, we must harness technology and innovation. Artificial intelligence, digital public infrastructure, frontier technologies, and modern data systems can accelerate progress across multiple SDGs simultaneously. Africa has the potential not merely to adapt technology, but to shape its future applications. And fifth, we must place climate resilience at the center of development planning. This is why Africa welcomes Ethiopia's selection to host the COP32 in Addis Ababa in 2027. The COP represents a generational opportunity for Africa to elevate its priorities on climate finance, adaptation, green industrialization, and sustainable growth. As such, the road to Addis Ababa must be the road towards implementation. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the central message of the 2026 Africa Sustainable Development Report is ultimately one of possibility. Africa possesses the world's youngest population, as mentioned. It has the world's largest free trade area. It holds enormous renewable energy potential, and it has demonstrated resilience in the face of repeated shocks. So we know Africa can achieve transformation. What remains is whether we can move with the speed, scale, and coordination required. Meeting that challenge will require capital institutions and committed partners. That's precisely where the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa will continue to stand with our member states. We remain committed to supporting member states by advancing domestic resource mobilization, implementing the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, promoting sustainable industrialization, strengthening data systems, and improving evidence-based policy making. Together, we can work to ensure that this report becomes a blueprint for delivery, one that accelerates implementation, unlocks financing, forges stronger partnerships, and ensures that Africa contributes not only to achieving the SDGs and Agenda 2063, but to shaping the future architecture of global development itself. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, USG Secretary Secretary of UNICA, for your insightful remarks, and thank you for the valuable support UNICA is providing to the African Union Commission and to the African Group in New York. Let's now move to another important remarks, this official launch by our dear sister, Ms. Isata Day, Deputy Assistant Administrator and Deputy Director of the Regional Bureau for Africa in the United Nations Development Program. So this was my sister.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues and friends, it's a pleasure to join you once again for Africa Day at the high-level political forum. This day has become an important tradition for Africa, a moment to reflect, learn collectively, and reaffirm our shared determination to deliver on the premise of the 2030 and Agenda 2063. This year term, advancing the two agendas through transformative and coordinated actions speaks directly to the moment we are in. Africa is not short of ambition, as we just heard. The continent has Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. Goals, the national development plans, regional integrated frameworks, the African Continental Free Trade Area, climate commitment, but also growing body of voluntary national reviews showing how seriously countries are engaging with the development agenda. The question before us is no longer about ambition alone. It is about translating ambition into delivery. Water and sanitation system that works, energy that powers homes and enterprises, infrastructures that connects people and markets, productive cities, and partnerships that unlock opportunities at scale. This challenge is precisely what Africa Sustainable Development Report 2026 highlights. It shows progress in policy alignment, institutional reforms, digital transformation, and human development, but also achievement we should recognize and build on. It's not also reminding us that the space of change remains insufficient, especially in structural transformation, productive employment, and infrastructure connectivity, climate resilience, the domestic resource mobilization, and peace and security. The report also points to the implementation gap, planning, budgeting, and delivery. Fiscal constraints, services pressures, statistical and data gaps, and climate-related shocks are making acceleration harder. These challenges reinforce the urgency of translating policies commitment into finance, measurable and locally delivered outcomes. This is why this Africa Days matters. It gives us an opportunity to move beyond stock taking and ask, what will it take to accelerate implementation now? From UNDP perspective, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, three shifts are essential. First, we must treat review processes as instruments for delivery. Voluntary national reviews should not only report progress, they should help countries identify what is broken, what needs to be improved, finance and scale. Voluntary local review can also bring evidence closer to where implementation happens. Second, we must go deeper in identifying the real constraint to acceleration. Too often, we see symptoms like limited fiscal space, fragmented projects, data gaps, climate shocks, or even uneven local delivery. The binding constraint may lie deeper in institutional mandate, financing system, coordination failure, but also regulatory barriers or disconnect between national plans and local implementation. Without deeper diagnostic, we risk multiplying their activities without accelerating outcomes. Third, we must harness our collective efforts around those constraints. Fragmentation is not natural. It slows delivery, weakens accountability, but also spread finance timely and makes it harder for countries to move from plan to results. The responses must therefore be more integrated. Financing institutions, data, partnership, and local delivery system need to work together around country-owned priorities. This is where portfolio approaches become important, not as another layer of process, but as a way to bring actors and instruments together around systems that matters: water, energy, cities, infrastructure, jobs, resilience, and regional value chains. The civilian commitment also gives us an important opportunity. Its success for Africa will be judged not only by global commitment, but also whether they help countries spend fiscal space, strengthen institutions, build an investable pipeline, mobilize finance, and deliver outcomes. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and dear colleagues, this is why UNDP supports countries across Africa in integrated financing, sustainable development acceleration, governance, local development, but also digital transformation, climate action, inclusive growth, and structural transformation. Connecting evidence to action, plan to financing, national ambitions to delivery, and partnership to measurable results, measurable results. As we reflect on the Africa Sustainable Development Report 2026, let us treat the report not only as a mirror, but also as a compass. It shows where progress is being made, where gaps remain, and where collective action must now focus. As we move from HLPF to implementation, let us be guided by a simple principle. Africa's development agenda does not need more fragmentation. It needs coherence, courage, and delivery. UNDP remains committed to working this journey with African countries. The African Union, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and thank you again, my dear brother, the Office of the Special Advisor for Africa, the African Development Bank, and all partners represented here today. Let us use this Africa Day not only to reaffirm our ambition, but also to deepen our collective action. The promise is clear. The urgency is real. The time for delivery is now. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, my dear sister. This is Saturday, Deputy Assistant Administrator of UNDP, for your important remarks and for the valuable role of UNDP as a development partner in Africa. Actually, now my role and my task as a moderator has come to an end, and this session has come to an end, and it remains just to thank all our distinguished speakers and distinguished presence, and to invite our speakers to a photo opportunity in front of this podium to mark the launch of the report of 2026. Happy Africa Day and best wishes to everyone. Thank you very much.
much. Thank you. So, actually, the DCP and the DCP will leave us, and the period dialogue will continue.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Idris. Thank you to our high-level speakers. We will be starting the next session immediately, so thank you to everyone for taking your seats.
Our Prime Minister. It's an honor. Thank you very much.
Ambassador.
How are you?
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.